Hello everyone, I'm going to be doing a quick tutorial on how to make a model in Maya, export it to 3D Coat, and then into Unreal Engine. So, what we're going to do is, I'm going to make a cube with a rounded top, because I feel like that will explain most of the aesthetics in our game. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a few edge loops around the top to make it appear like it has a rounded top. So there we go. Just select the face now, and I'm going to scale it down. And select this outer edge, and then scale that down too. So this is going to smooth this for me right off the bat, but most of the time it won't do that. So when you extrude anything, it'll harden the edge around it, and it'll give you something like this. And you see how there's lines in between? That is a totally low poly looking object, and that's not what we want. We want something that has both curves and hard edges for the aesthetics of our game. So what you need to do is you need to go to edge mode and select whatever edges you want to be soft. So I want this curve to be a soft edge and make it appear like it has many more polys than it does. So what I can do is I selected those edges, I can go to mesh display and soften the edge, and then everything will be smooth, and it will import into the engine like this after you texture it. Alright, so now I want to go over one more fundamental, is putting an object inside of another object and them both being on the same UV map. Chances are you'll have to do this, because if you want something complex like this sphere on the outside of this crate thing, in order to do this, like extruding, it would require a lot more work, and that is no good. You'd have to have edge loops around this entire thing, and that's just not optimal. So if you really wanted to get into it, you should go in here and delete the faces that can't be seen. However, that's not a concern for this tutorial. You could just select a face and just delete it, literally. So yeah. But you want to go into object mode and select both of the objects that you want to merge. Otherwise, like if you were to export this right now, they'd both be on different UV maps, and that's not something you want. So you go up to mesh, you go to combine, and now they are the same geometry. So they're going to be on the same UV map when we export. So we're going to export now as an OBJ to documents. I'll export it as demo. Alright, so you want to actually have smoothing on so that the work we did on the edges transfers over into 3D Coat and beyond. So yeah. Alright, so now inside of 3D Coat, you're going to want to go to Paint UV Mapped Mesh per pixel. You're going to want to go to this folder icon, and then you're going to find the object that you made, which is right here. So now that this is open, there are a few things you really want to look out for. You want to import normal map software preset to be Unreal Engine. You want to get UV map typing to auto mapping, unless you want to do your UV maps manually. And then you want to go to, if you wanted to do your UV maps manually, you need to do that in Maya, or do that beforehand. Alright, so UV set name, I usually call it text, to just be consistent. And then texture width, you want to be, since this is a really small object, you can go for 512, actually probably 256. But honestly, that's probably not a probably not good. So I'm just gonna go for 1000. That's not optimal at all. You don't want to do 1000 for anything. Large assets maybe, but anything like medium, small assets, you want to have 128, 256. Let me close Facebook because this is okay. So if we press OK, it'll import the mesh exactly as it was in Maya. Here it is. UV coat, 3D coat is a very, very helpful tool. because you can do everything from paint to retopologize, UV, sculpt, and render in it, which is really nice because you can get great renders, great sculpts, and everything in the same program without having to go between them, which can save a lot of headaches in importing and all that kind of stuff. So 3D Coat works like Photoshop in that it has layers down here. So layer 1 is going to be your base layer. Layer 0 is the actual geometry material. So you don't want to mess with this at all. So you want to go to layer 1, rename it to base. Base is going to be the base color for the object. You'll want to go to whatever smart material you want to use for it. So smart materials are basic materials that you put on your object. They are not to be used as, I'm going to make this a solid metal texture and it's just going to be a solid metal crate in the game. That would look really bad. You don't want to do that at all. So it needs to calculate ambient occlusion. Before I do that through this, I'm going to show you guys how to do that through the menu system. So in order to bake ambient occlusion, which you will want to do, you want to go to textures, calculate occlusion. And because you want to have it to be sphere and into new layer, light count is how smooth you want the textures to be. If you're making something big, you want it to be the 24,000 one if your computer can handle it. Otherwise, for this tutorial, I'm just going to do 1000 so it goes quick. So it's going to calculate the occlusion, and now it'll be occluded in some areas. But we don't have many areas that it can occlude, so it didn't really do much. So go over to base layer, make sure you're in base and not ambient occlusion. And then once you have that, you can go over to your paint bucket tool, and then you can view what the texture will look like when you paint bucket onto it. So this texture has a slight normal map. You can see that it looks kind of 3D around the scratches and stuff, which is what we want. We want objects to be slightly worn down. You don't want them to look pristine, especially not with our grungy aesthetic. So we're going to, instead of make a grungy texture straight off the bat, we're going to go to a kind of a newer looking metal. I'll have to go to the metals folder for that. This one will do. No, it's still too new. This chrome one. Okay, there we go. So there we go, we got the metals on there. So if it's not selecting everything because of occlusion maps, you're going to want to go to tool options, which is going to be floating over here if you haven't docked it somewhere, but I have it over here. You're going to want to uncheck use color albedo tolerance, because that will mess up where the fill actually gets to. Okay, so now that we have this object here, we are going to add some wear and tear to it so it doesn't just look like a strange metal cube. So there are surface materials for dirt, there are some for rust, there are some for other things. So we're going to just select this random rust texture. You're going to want it to be in its own layer and call it rust. It doesn't look like it's doing too much because the ambient occlusion didn't bake all the way. So I'm going to actually delete this and then bake it again so we can get some actual occlusion. I'm going to bake it hemisphere for this, but you don't want to do this usually because that's only baking based on lighting in the scene in 3D Coat. So the bottom of this will have occlusion on it, and you don't know if the light's always going to be up ahead. It could be anywhere. So it's going to occlude that bottom part, which gives it more detail, obviously, but so when the rust gets on it now, it's going to actually give it some kind of rusty look. This is way too much rust though, right? So what we need to do is we need to either change the opacity to be lower, which still is okay, but you can, it's kind of like a gray rust, and that is not good. We're going to go over to this rust and turn the we do want the roughness up. So roughness is how shiny material is, and metalness is how metal a material is. Metalness is mostly just reflections, so how reflective you want the material to be. Opacity, we'll turn that up a little bit, and there we go. So now we have a nice rusty looking box, and this is all done without using a tablet or anything, so you don't need a tablet to do this at all. And it's looking pretty good now. I'm going to go over some more of the actual painting tools. So I'm going to add panels to it. So I made a new layer called panels. It's just going to be a standard blend layer. I'm going to go up to paintbrush here, and I'm going to select this rectangular. Oh, this little menu is brought up by pressing E on your keyboard, and then you can just quickly select one of these things. So if I were to do it now, oh, I'm still on the rust. We're going to close out of the rust. Why the brush looks like this is because I'm using a weird alpha, and to get to a different alpha, you're going to want to go up to the top right and click alphas, and then select whichever one you want to use. So I'm going to use this solid one because it gives a nice clean line. So now we're going to switch it to orthographic view. So orthographic view is a view completely without perspective. So if you get super up close, normally this side would be much larger than this back side. And it's perfect for making these perfectly square panels. So if you want to view the wireframe, you can go up to view and then click on wireframe. It's just easier for making these panels. If you want to make a panel, what I usually like to do is I like to line up the top of the circle and the other side of the circle with a side to get it nice and lined up. And then you just drag and drop, and then that creates a panel. So we have this nice panel here. If you wanted to make an indent instead, you could hold control, and you see how the red on the brush turns into a blue? You just drag and drop, and then that will make an indent instead. And it's not actually changing the geometry, it's changing the normal map on the object, which is what you want. So if I want a different color on this, I could go up to color palette, select maybe like a pink or something, and then I could go to, I'm going to show you a different way. So this little circle thing right here is one of my favorite tools, because what you can do with it is you can get outlines of rectangles instead of actual rectangles. So what this is going to do is it's going to create a pink outline over this, which is a nice look when you're trying to add lots of detail without having to get too into the texturing part. So there you go. Nice amount of detail on those panels. And this is still done without using a tablet. So you can get nice robotic looking things without ever needing anything like that. Alright, so we're going to go over this tool. So this is the vertex lasso, which works exactly like it does in Photoshop. So if you want like a specific shape on something, you just click, 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 and then drag it back around, and you'll get a nice triangle. Okay. So if you wanted to smooth this out, you hold shift and it turns green. And then, oh, let me change the brush back to regular brush. And then when you go over things, it'll smooth out anything you have on that layer. So if you have normals on that layer, it'll smooth out the normals. If you have color on that layer, it'll smooth out the color, which isn't really applicable for much, but I use it sometimes to blend between different objects. It's mostly useful for natural shapes. Okay, so now I'm going to go over stencils. Stencils are extremely useful when trying to add details on things. So it's hard to see, but this little pattern right here is a hexagon pattern, and I love this stencil because you can get nice looking textures on things without any effort at all. So these preview options up here are for changing what the pattern will look like on the object. So right now it's being cube mapped. I want it to be mapped from the camera. So it'll just have a constant overlay on the camera. It is very, very important that you are in orthographic mode when you're doing this from camera. Okay, so I'm going to switch it back to a full-on rectangle, or a full-on fall-off brush here. And I'm going to drag and drop and create this hexagon pattern over this object. So that looks nice. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a border around it using this brush, and we can do that. Let me make it metal actually. So I'm going to turn the metalness all the way up, and I'm going to turn the roughness all the way down. Then I'm going to go to color palette, and I'm going to select a metallic looking brown. Okay. Now I can drag and drop a border around these hexagons and make a nice metallic border around them. So normally you would want to plan this out carefully so you don't have this weirdness going on like right here. However, I did not plan that out at all, so shame on me. But now I'm going to go over emissive maps, which will be on most of the objects you guys make, or at least a majority, or actually not like some of them, honestly. But so I'm going to make a new layer called emission, and I'm going to change this via the standard blend drop-down menu to use as emissive. Once it's on that, it'll know to export emissive maps as well. So I'm going to give it this bright blue, and I'm going to make a circle around this center circle and have it be an emissive map. So this is going to glow now instead of just be inserted in the object. So all you have to do, just drag and drop, and you can create different little like patterns like this, and it's really nice. So I'm just going to create a little bit more before I show the next thing. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go over polygon painting, polygon by polygon. So if you want to just paint like specifically this polygon on the outside, I'm gonna change the color real quick, but it's this little triangle right here. You can select a polygon and it paints it automatically. So I had to click a bunch because the opacity is turned down up here. I'm just gonna turn that up to 100 now, and it's fully metal and very smooth. So that's gonna show up as basically a mirror inside of the game engine. Okay, so what else do we need to go over? So there's the airbrush tool. That's really good for getting normal maps on things. So if I were to go up to alphas and I wanted like a nice bumpy texture on something, I would select one of these normal maps here, or alphas, and then go to this object, and then I'd right click and pull up to make the brush have more depth to it. And then once you paint, it paints bumps on things. If you don't want it to have any color to it, you can click off this or the green one, and then it won't have any kind of color maps on it. And then of course you can hold control on any brush and have it go negative in case you want holes in something. Okay. So I'm going to go over text now, which isn't applicable to all objects, but it can be for some. So when you want to have text somewhere, it's just using the text tool, clicking into places, and then entering some kind of text. LOL. Okay, so you can modify how you want them to look and everything, and then when you're done, you just press enter, and it makes that on the object, which is a very, very handy tool to have, so you don't have to import something from Photoshop. Okay. Now, let's see. If you wanted to freeze something, you go down here to this little snowflake, and that's the freeze tool. I like using this in polygon mode, So if you wanted to like specifically say an asset isn't going to be painted on, you would use this tool and then paint around this polygon. And then whenever you were to paint on a layer, say you wanted to like go crazy with the coloring up here but didn't want to paint that face, you would be able to now because you excluded that section. And whenever you want a section back, you can go up to freeze and then unfreeze all, and then it'll give it back. Okay, now what else do I need to go over? If something is too bumpy and you don't want it to be bumpy anymore, you can go to this iron tool and it'll smooth out your normals for you. It can give you some pretty weird results sometimes, so I don't really recommend it, but why not, you know. Okay, so I'm just going to go over the render room really quickly because it's a good way of sharing your assets with a group. So all you have to do is click render, and then it'll be rendered in this room. You want to click real-time render, and then it'll render by itself. You probably want to turn wireframe on for this so we can look at the topology of whatever you're making. And then all you have to do is open the snipping tool. Click new, and then you can make a selection of the object, copy it, and then you can paste that directly into Slack, which is really nice. Okay, so now that we went over all that, we are ready to export this into Unreal Engine. So when you're done, you just go up to File and you go Export Objects and Textures, and you'll come up to this screen here. So a couple things you want to make sure are in this menu are output mesh. You want this to be named similarly to your original, but you want it to be FBX. So I'm going to call this demo, and then it's going to be .fbx. So now texture export / import workflow, you'll want to be roughness metalness because that is PBR texturing. You want to export the mid poly mesh. Y and Z scene axis will be automatically calculated for you because you selected Unreal Engine at the beginning when importing the asset into 3D Coat. Color extension, you want to use target maps because target maps are a lossless form of image sharing that supports see-through alpha, and it's just generally the best way to share high quality images. So now this is new in this new version of 3D Coat, the export presets, and Unreal Engine 4 is already a preset in here, so you don't have to worry about that too much. One thing you do have to worry about though is that there's no emissive intensity map. There's an emissive color map, but without the intensity, it doesn't know where to put the emissive. So what you want to do is you want to come up here to add texture, and it'll make one down here. And then once you go here, you can go just rename it to emissive intensity. Oops. Emissive intensity. And you want it to be a target file. You want it to be RGB 8-bit. And then where it says RBG, you're going to come up here and say you want it to be a emissive power map. So now that that's done, it's going to export along with all of these other textures a emissive power map, which is just a mask that tells it where it wants to glow. So now that all of these are up, we're not going to do displacement at all because that adds geometry, so we're going to X that out. Base color we need, metalness you need, roughness you need, normal you need. These four are necessary, and so please export them. Ambient occlusion is sometimes needed. It depends on the object. If you're making a tiny little object, it doesn't need ambient occlusion, but we're going to blow this up a bit, so it's going to have ambient occlusion on it. Opacity is going to be not needed in this case, and honestly, I don't know how to use this inside of Unreal Engine yet, but so I'm just going to get rid of that. And then everything else should be okay. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to export this now. Let me create a folder for this actually so I don't have a billion textures. Oh, it's gonna crash. Okay. Alright. There we go. Oh, it saved it as an OBJ. You're gonna want to be careful. There's some finicky stuff. So FBX demo. Okay. So now that everything like this is okay, we're going to click OK here, and then it's going to automatically export everything into that folder that we specified. So I'm going to go up to my documents here and go to demo. And here's all of these different files. So now we're going to import them into Unreal Engine, which I just have up here. I'm not signed into the source controls, so let me do that now, just as like a basic thing of what you have to do every single time you want to log in. So you're gonna want to select Perforce. You guys all know this by now, but okay. It's gonna load my workspace up here. Unless it's down. Whatever. That's disappointing. Anyways, we're going to go up to my test level, which has a few things in it right now, but should be fine for demonstrating. And I'm going to go up to Assets, Environment, and then you're going to make your own folder for the demo, or I'm going to make a new folder for this demo asset, and you're going to make new folders for whatever you want to import. So once you have the demo asset, or the folder you made open, you're going to want to go to your window here, select all of your textures, and then drag them directly into this folder. And once it has this little plus icon here, you're going to be able to drop them. Let me just make sure this is still recording. Yeah. Alright, so everything is okay. You don't really have to mess with this too much. Honestly, like, there's not really too much you have to worry about here. So just click import, and then everything will be okay. Everything's imported now, and we're ready to set up this object. So right now, this object, when we drag it into the scene, it is ridiculously small. So let me just run up to this little object. You can see it way off in the distance over there, but it's pretty small right now. So we want it to be about washing machine size, right? So let's move it up to here, and what we're going to do is we're going to pay attention to this pivot point. So this pivot point obviously isn't on the ground, which is not what we want at all. We want, if you're just importing assets into the city, you want everything to just work automatically without having to fiddle with this. So we're gonna have to go and fix both the scale and this pivot point in Maya. So let's bring up Maya real quick. The asset's still open, and we're going to change the scale to whatever we want it in Unreal Engine. So it's scaled up to 8.25. I'm just gonna scale it up to 8 just for simplicity. Alright, and it's still gonna be like basically the same size, so it doesn't really matter too much. So we're going to select this object again, and we're going to, oh wait, no, that's not how we do this. So if you were to do that, it would mess up your UVs. So we're gonna create a new scene, and we're going to import the demo object that we exported from 3D Coat into Maya. And here it is. So now that we're in Maya, we're going to find the pivot point, which we're going to do by just pressing W. You're going to want to turn point snapping on for this. Alright, so now once you have your object selected, you're going to want to press D. And when you press D, it unlocks this pivot point. And we need that very much. So then once that's unlocked, we can move this down. And you're going to want to move your mouse over one of the bottommost vertices. So once it's moved over there, it'll move down there and be perfectly fine on the bottom of the mesh. Once it's down there, you press D again, and that puts you back into regular move mode. And then you're going to want to uncheck point snapping and check grid snapping. And what this is going to do is it's going to snap it to this grid, which is ground, like it's the 0 on the ground. And there you go. Now your pivot's completely changed, and the object will import automatically onto the ground. You're going to want to go back to your object, and you're going to scale it up 8 in everything, otherwise it'll be like that, or you know, whatever size it needs to be. You're gonna have to check because it's gonna be different for whatever object you import. So mine was 8, for example, and you do that just by clicking it, and then you can see what transform it has. Also, I know that Maya doesn't have the attribute editor open by default, so just press Ctrl A and that just opens for you, and then you can select whatever object you want. So now that it is scaled up appropriately, we're going to be able to export the selection, and we're going to go to FBX here, and we're going to just save it over the old one. Now that that's done, we're going to be able to re-import it into here. So I'm going to go back to this demo object folder. I'm going to drag and drop this into that folder again. And that'll re-import it for you. And once it's in, it's huge now, so we're going to want to change it back to 1, and then it'll be normal sized. And now, whenever we drag it into the scene, it's going to be at the ground instead of in the sky. Or in the ground. Okay, so now we're going to set up the material. So the material editor took me a little bit to figure out, but once you figure it out, it's perfectly okay. So what I just did right there is every object has a default material on it, and you don't want this, so I just deleted that by pressing the delete key. Okay, let me change the name of this first. So this is going to be the material for this object, and you want it to be named appropriately. So just right click, rename, and you're gonna call it whatever the material or whatever the object's called, underscore mat. And that's the general naming convention for materials. So what you're going to want to do is select all the different textures you have and then drag them into this material editor. It'll import them automatically for you, otherwise it's a pain to just set up everything manually. So now that all of these materials are imported, they're going to slowly populate into this little editor here, and we're going to move them around so that it makes sense. So this is the base color. The base color is going to be a very important map for us because it's going to give the object all of its color properties. So we're going to plug the base color into the base color node. You can select, or you can see which texture one of these maps is by going down here to this window and seeing that, oh, this is the roughness channel. So this is going to be like in the middle because we have a metalness channel too. And we're going to move this up here and then plug that into the metallic. And then it just works by plugging in these different maps, and it's super simple, and it works a lot easier than Unity's texturing editor, texture editor, material editor, same thing. Okay, and now this is ambient occlusion, so we're going to put that in here. So the emissive maps are off to the side because they're a little special. If you were to just import this emissive map to emissive color, it's not really going to do much. Like, it's going to glow, it's going to make the entire object glow a little bit, and that's not really what you want. You want to mask out the areas where you want it to glow. So how we do that is we go to you right click, and then you search up here for a multiply node. Once that's in, you can also hold M and click, and it creates one as well. Another one we need is a scalar parameter. So you can just search scalar parameter, or you can hold S and click at the same time and it will create one, but sometimes it's easier just to right click and make one. So now what we're going to do is we're going to basically multiply these two together so that this one masks out this one. So what we're going to do is this emissive color is going to go to this first multiply. What this multiply is going to do is it's going to split it up and multiply both of these by this parameter, which is going to change the brightness of the emissive. So we're going to name this parameter. You always want to name parameters, or else they're going to all be the same on the texture or the material. So we're going to name this EI for emissive intensity. We're going to change the default value. So for regular objects, you want it to be from 5 to 10. But since this is an example, I'm going to make it 100, just to show what emissive is going to look like in the engine. And you plug that into B, and you plug this multiply map into the next one. And then you can plug in either one of these to either one of these. And then it will automatically have this emissive map going whenever it decides to, yeah. So as you can see, it's glowing a little bit. For this tutorial, I'm going to make it glow a lot, so I'm going to change it to 500. And that should amp it up a little bit. Yeah. So now that we have these bright lights shining on this object here, we're going to click apply. And that is the end of this material. So you're going to want to save it always, or else it's not going to update in your actual level. So now once you get back to your level, sometimes these material, well, it's working right now, but sometimes it won't work just straight out of the box like that. And in order to change that, you're going to have to double click on your object and then go into this little object editor. So sometimes it'll have like the default material still on it. And the way you change that is you just drag your material and you change it in this little box right here. And then every time you place one of these, it'll have this texture on it. We're going to save that. Okay, and I didn't mention this before, but to get into the material editor, you just double click it and then it brings it up. Probably should have said that earlier, but you know. And I think that's it, but you're going to want to do this for all of your materials. Make sure they're named properly and scaled up, because if someone's populating the world with objects, they're not going to want like to move it in and it be super small, because then that's just another thing for them to scale up or down or something. For previews and sending it to the group, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to open the snipping tool again, and then you can just press new and then drag over whatever objects that you want to move or select. So don't want to save that. Okay. I think that's it for this tutorial. You should know everything now that you need to in order to make nice high quality assets for the game, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing all of your guys' stuff. So alright, thank you guys for watching.